Welcome to Trans Canada Stories. I'm Sin Sweeney, and I'm joined by the lovely co-host Emma Stanley. And in Trans Canada Stories, we're all about going beyond binary and telling stories of trans people as people. Welcome to the show. Today, we are joined on Trans Canada Stories by Laura Whiteland. Laura is the first openly trans portfolio manager and financial planner in Canada, as well as a grassroots activist for queer and trans issues. Laura is the founder and principal financial planner of Inclusive Financial Planning. She's also a prominent financial professional. Laura holds several professional designations and is a recognized expert in her field, appearing in media like the Globe and Mail, National Post, CTV News Network, CBC Radio. And if that weren't enough, she's a media ambassador for Financial Planning Canada, Financial's leading financial planning organization. Laura is the recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal for her work on the 2S LGBTQIA plus community in rural Nova Scotia. Welcome to the studio, Laura. So as someone who's in the transgender community, as a transgender woman, I feel like there's a very strong pressure these days to sort of industrialize our own queerness. That if you're in healthcare, you have to be in queer healthcare, and if you're in finance, you have to be in inclusive finance. And there's this like you have to bring in this element of yourself to the business world. It is non-optional if you are open about who you are. Do you feel that pressure where you are in your business? And as we were just talking about, I kind of know that you do because of pressures that you're receiving from outside to like serve as a DEI consultant when that is very specifically not your job. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think there definitely is pressure, just existing in the rooms that you exist within and you're the only trans person and you're looking around and everyone's kind of like looking at you whenever those topics come up, and we'll
Yeah.
use a lot of emphasis around those topics. Yeah, I think you do end up kind of wearing that and everyone kind of looks to you. I mean, you know, actually, I guess to talk about kind of like the inclusive finance part of it, like the really where I come at it from is not so much specifically like trans inclusive. It's more about like being inclusive of everyone and being welcoming. Like I find financial advice generally is very hard to access, and I would actually say a majority of my clients aren't queer or trans. They're just folks that can't get advice elsewhere, or really like working with me, or kind of the different perspective I bring. So I feel like there's definitely pressure in a lot of spaces, but I think, when I'm working one-on-one with a client, is actually probably the space there is the least amount of pressure.
Mm-hmm. And when you get into spaces outside of business, like at conferences or in other meetings, do you find people are often asking you for advice that, like, again, is just sort of outside the scope?
Yeah, I think maybe I sometimes feel like you're kind of like the guinea pig. Especially even I find even in a lot of like professional spaces, when you're in conferences, even if it's very queer centric, it's not uncommon to be like the only trans woman in the room. So there's kind of like, even if there's other non-binary and trans masculine people around, there's still even less like trans feminine people in those spaces. So yeah, I do often find, I think people are kind of looking for it. And at some point, you just kind of have to be like, whoa, like this is not actually what I do. I try and be helpful. I try and be like, open. And I think you have to be. I think when you're in those spaces, you really like... you can only be so obstinate for so long before it like impacts others. So I very much am like conscious of that fact of like, for some people, like I might be the first like trans entrepreneur they're dealing with, or the first like trans business owner, and that's a dynamic that they're not used to. And if I give off a really bad impression, then they'll just paint that paintbrush like the whole way along. So I do feel there's maybe a bit of pressure to be more polite about it, and sometimes kind of help people along the way and maybe hope that they'll figure it out of like, this isn't really what I do.
So do you notice like then, like, is there a difference then if you notice if someone is just cognizant going in and like, it's like, I don't want to make a mistake and they are asking from that point of view? Are you more kind of patient with that, or, or is there just like, okay, yeah, I'll answer this, but I'm cutting this off now and I'm going to tell you where you can go to get this information?
I mean, the cognizant of like not wanting to make a mistake thing, I feel like that's an idea that maybe like cis people bring to the table, of like they feel like they can't offend me, and I'm like, the things you're going to offend me with are not the things that you think. Like if you come up and you say something like terrible to me, like that, I deal with that every day. I don't care about that. It's like all of the like other little things that like just make me uncomfortable and like remind you that you don't belong there are like the things they're not apologizing or acknowledging or dealing with. So like, I don't know. It's hard to say like somebody's coming up with like 100% innocent and like just like seeking knowledge when they're like, hey, I'm going to come and talk to you to like justify some like racism or something else, or like whatever weird thing they're going to come talk to me because like I've been vulnerable in some other space in a conference. And then they feel like they can just kind of like download all of their discomfort onto me and be like, oh, I just like don't know how to deal with this. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it's hard to really know the difference of like, I've often felt in my own life, my intentions have never mattered. So no one else's. I don't really worry about other people's intentions. Because no one cares about mine.
Like Cynthia, what you're talking about, where knowledge seeking is okay. Let me start that again. Another thing that occurs to me, Sin, is knowledge seeking is something that I approve of. The problem with asking someone, especially someone who's not a DEI professional, to provide that, often without a lot of warning, is that the first mistake that people have made is look it up first. Just Google this. Like, you do not need to make this someone else's job right now. In the same way that I do not walk into doctors' conferences and ask them about this weird mole. It's just like,
Okay.
it's a sitcom joke for a reason. Nobody likes that.
So would it be a parallel to, like, say, for example, when you and Kendall, I think, were at the Halifax Shopping Center and you were doing something for Pride last summer, and I think some people came up to the table and then they started going off about, yeah, we're really supportive and my friend's trans kid is this, but I often wonder about this and that, and they've been up, and they start dumping all of that. Is that like, I'm kind of feeling like, is that then like it bringing
there's
up
like there's being an information resource, which personally I don't mind, but again, that is my job. And there's being free therapy for people's doubts, which is very much not my job. And that line's hard to draw, and people do walk over it sometimes without really meaning to. I get that. But it is really uncomfortable, because then what am I supposed to do? Like, no, you're a pretty bad person. So that's what I think. No, I'm not going to say that. I wish I could say that. I wish I had, the chutzpah to say that, but no, that's not happening.
Well, and when you're in the room, I feel
like trying to equivocate someone else's discomfort, and I don't really want to.
It is a fine line, though. Is that? Sorry, go ahead, Laura. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the unfortunate thing, though, is that, when you're in those spaces and everyone has made it very clear that you are different or don't belong, it's like, hey, somebody just kind of walks up and like throws their emotional baggage in your face. And then like, like you're just like their like emotional steward. And then if you don't like reciprocate and like help them deal with it, then like they're just going to double down and like make it even worse for you in those spaces. So it's kind of that like, yeah, I think there's the pressure that you like have to deal with it in the moment. And then, so and I guess the unfortunate thing is like somebody thinks they're taking up like 2 minutes of your time, but they're the 30th person to do that. Right. And every time is like difficult, and you have to then like process it because like they've just thrown like everything at the wall at you. So
yeah, so realizing that, like what you're putting upon that person to satisfy your own curiosity is, like, a microaggression. You got to think about, is this person having to feel that every single day? Or it's just like, if I'm in the room and I know, like, because we always talk about like what to do when you make a mistake, and you don't make a big deal, like you apologize, you move on. But I do want people to know I'm authentic. Like, I do care I do care that you're in the room, Laura, and I would not want to offend you. Or so I guess in every conversation I go into somebody, like if I'm in those spaces, that I just want to make sure that they know, like if I mess up, call me out, tell me. But I'm like, I want to make sure I am doing right, because I do care. Like, I mean, it's important to me, but because it's important somebody does that with my kid and their friends and other people in the community, or that they do it with somebody that I'm working with. Like I just think it's important all around. So.
And I just wish cis people would talk about gender. I sometimes just wish like cis people would talk about gender, like when trans people aren't around. You know what I mean? Like I was not out for a very long period of my life, and you never hear cis people like just like talk about gender amongst themselves. Like it's like it's like when you're the trans in the room, and then somebody's like, oh. Yeah, that's a thing I've never thought of. Let me ask all the questions, or let me like, oh, you've like shaken all these thoughts loose in my head, or like, oh, that was a cool talk you gave. I've never thought about this even once in my life. Let me just like export everything I'm currently feeling at you. I often like before we started, you asked about me putting my pronouns in. Kind of the thought I've always gone with is when I see two cis people share pronouns without knowing a trans person is around is when I will start sharing pronouns, because like I very much feel like it's something done performatively by cis people to be like, oh, we did the trans thing, now we've shared the pronouns, rather than like an actual like desire to like have a nuanced conversation about gender.
I see where you're going. I can't follow you all the way there. I do think that there is a fake it till you make it aspect of inclusion that is very valid.
That's fair.
You practice before you get good, especially with language. Language does not come naturally to any of us, and it takes practice.
And I don't begrudge anyone else who wants to do it. That's why I am like obstinate and weird about it.
Well, we had a meeting with I was with my kiddo and with a doctor who we hadn't seen before, but like they know us like well, like we've seen them in different circles outside of the profession. But when we sat down in the room, she looked at me and she said, "Hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so. I use she, her pronouns," and she looked right at me, and we've had 1,000 conversations, and she knows my son and my pronouns. And she said, "And your pronouns are?" And she then confirmed with, and I was like, wow, that was really cool. And it felt different, because I'm like, you just did it. Like, that's just, you do that all the time now. And that is like, it just felt good. Like, and it took me back, because it was kind of the, oh, do I just, we assume that we know, but she just set a precedent right there that this is my space, and I'm going to ask you whether, you're going to feel uncomfortable or not. But yeah. I mean, she works in the field, but still, I just thought it was a really great, she's kind of setting by example there, but.
All right. Thank you so much for indulging me on jumping into the sticky stuff right away. I honestly am never really good at the preamble. So Laura, your business, we're just going to work backwards now.
Okay.
And is going to get really mad at me because I have gone wildly off script, because I always do.
I'm here for chaos.
Chaos, we thrive in chaos.
So Laura, your business is inclusive financial planning. You mentioned earlier that it's about getting advice to people who would not normally have access or the ability to get that. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I worked in finance for over a decade now. I don't like how old that already makes me sound. But yeah, so I worked kind of in traditional. I worked in banking. I worked in wealth management. I've done the gambit of many of the occupations. I was very young, working with at kind of the highest levels of that industry, and we whether or not we want to get into that, it came to a crashing halt at one point, and I'll let the listeners maybe guess as to why. And I had the opportunity to start my own business. I was in a position where it made sense, and I was talking to my wife about it, and she, like, the first name that she came up with was like, "You got to call it inclusive financial planning." And I was like, "That's it. There's no better. I'm not going to come up with anything better than that." And it really like encapsulates, inclusion means so many different things, and there's so many different elements to inclusion. And really, in my mind, what that means is anyone can walk in I mean, we work digitally, so it's a metaphorical walking in, but walking in as they are, and working with people where they're at, with the problems that they have and with the goals that matter to them, and not really applying, any sort of bias or agenda on top of them. So I don't sell any financial products, contrary to what a lot of financial planners do. So I just work on either a project or an hourly rate. So I work directly with my clients. And I also do some, pay what you can work. So for the folks that, there's a financial barrier to maybe getting some help, I'm also happy to work with them as well. So really the goal is to make it as easy to understand the financial situation you're in and then make decisions. Decision making is a huge part of the process when I'm working with anyone. And, it's really about centering it on the person that I'm dealing with. I sometimes talk about, I walk in with a blank piece of paper because I don't want to bring in any preconceived notions, which ironically actually runs contrary to every bit of advice I've ever gotten in the industry of what you're supposed to do. Because you're supposed to walk in with like, oh, this is what I think, and this is what you should be doing, and here's the best idea of the day. And I've really, rejected that and said, you know what, when I sit down with someone, the first thing I say is, what's on your mind? And we just start with that.
And have you always lived in the area? Is this what made you choose Truro for your business?
So I grew up in Dartmouth, actually. So in the
Okay.
back when it wasn't cool, and it was just when it was just poor. I like to. There's a Johnny Cash song, "The Man in Black," and he talks about the folks who lived on the hungry, hopeless side of town. That's where I feel like I grew up. So I mean, I worked, went to school in Dartmouth, and then. I don't know if you remember post 2008 economics very well, but jobs just didn't. They just weren't there. So I had a short summer job working downtown Halifax, and I had the option to apply. I applied for a job and I had the option to, I guess, accept it, and it was a branch banking job in Truro. So that's why we're here. And just kind of ended up liking living in a town.
Nice.
Yeah. So you commuted for a little bit, and then you just uprooted and hopped on your horse and went, like Johnny Cash.
9 months to get a job up here. So I commuted for that time, and then she finally found a job, and we I commuted all winter. That was I started in September and we moved here in June, so that was really bright. And we moved up here once she got a full-time job, and it took a while.
So for listeners, like it's Truro to Halifax, Truro to Dartmouth, what we're like about 45 minutes, 50 minutes down that.
It's 100 kilometers. Okay. So it's about an hour in good weather and about 2 in not.
And about 4 minutes from some of the driving I've seen in Halifax, but I have lived in a lot of countries, a lot of very big cities, and this is the first one where the driving scares me.
There's not. I mean, yeah, traffic is funny. It's kind of
I learned to drive a motorcycle in Bangkok, and Halifax is where the driving scares me.
But see, Halifax is that weird mix of everyone's a little too nice that they don't quite follow the roads. Like in a lot of big cities, it's just give her or die, and you just know what to expect because everyone's just doing their thing. Whereas Halifax, you'll randomly stop to let you turn left, and then just cause an accident.
Yeah, although those people are getting fewer and fewer, I think, because now they're combined with the post-COVID road rage, and you think they're going to stop and I'm just going to walk out, but no. Now they're a little New Yorker a bit and kind of threaten you. But so you talked a little bit about what is inclusive financial planning. Do you want to talk a little bit then what it looks like when it is not inclusive, and what you really try to do differently from what you've seen when you were working with another a larger corporate organization?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite kind of stories to tell is sitting in at a conference with 1,000 financial advisors, and one of the segments, the breakout sessions, was on making financial advice more inclusive, and the entire thing was about how they didn't say white but it was about white women and like how to give advice to white women, because like that is the frontier of diversity in the like financial spaces of like,
Okay.
oh, there's all these like white men who are dying and their wives are going to inherit their money. Maybe we should figure out how to talk to them. Is like, that is, so like we're not even
That's
talking
the
about like
bleeding
white
edge.
women in
Okay.
general. Like we're talking just like older, like widows basically, is like where the conversation is at. So like, yeah, there's really not even like a comparison. Like, you know, me just existing in those rooms is like just awkward, to be honest with you.
So, in today's TD Connected Community Moment, we'd love to know, do you participate in active financial planning and have any advice that you can share with us here? We would love to learn if you have any tips or tricks that you can share. If there's anything that stood out to you from this particular show, click the link that is in the show notes, and we put it up here on the screen. And we really look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for tuning in.
Me just existing in those rooms is like just awkward, to be honest with you.
And yet you bring so much to the space. I mean, you can bring so, I mean, I think the broadness of perspective can be so helpful to, you know, I mean, I get uncomfortable having those conversations. So,
Yeah.
For sure. And I very much feel like it's my responsibility to not make it uncomfortable and to sort of, you know, try and be vulnerable in the space with people and really acknowledge that. And, you know, I talk a lot about how with folks about, you know, how there is these taboos and like actually just having the conversation that it's like, it's okay to feel uncomfortable about this. You know, even the way, you know, I do billing. I don't bill people until we're done, like a plan, for example. Just to kind of say, like, I am in this vulnerable space with you. Like, I'm not getting paid until you have the option to just not pay me if you don't like what I do. And there's a lot of planners, even in the advice only side, that don't do that. They want a deposit or something. And part of that for me is just saying, like, I am along this journey with you. It doesn't matter how long it takes. You know, if we take 10 months to go through this, like, you don't have to feel like, oh, well, I paid for it, so I should do it, or there's money in the middle of this. Like, we just try and take money out of the conversation between us so that we can, again, focus more on like them as the person. So I've really tried to, you know, as structurally as possible, make it so that, you know, money isn't the conversation between us. It's a conversation we're having together.
I love that.
So you were mentioning how a lot of financial planning is based around decision making, and that the conversation between the financial planning community and basically everyone except fairly wealthy white cis straight men is shaky at best, mostly non-existent. So
yeah,
the trans community and kind of the queer community in general is historically underemployed and underhoused. And in some of our workshops, it's come up that there's also this sense of why bother a lot of the time. Certainly that was my reality, and the experience of other trans people that I know, of a sort of hopelessness about success. Like, yes, I will survive, but there's no point in thinking about retirement, or there's no point in thinking about home ownership or starting a family, because those things are simply not available to me. There's this block that gets built up. And so I think a lot of people, or I get the impression that a lot of people in our community are kind of lacking those skills. Do you feel like like we need to directly address the lack of sort of basic financial skills within the queer community or the trans community specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think even within, you know, using the community as a whole, I think is somewhat incorrect, because I do think, you know, the queer community has more access to advice than the trans community does, 100%, and support. And yeah, there is a lot of like socioeconomic reasons why that is very true. And talking about, underemployment and unemployment and just having a very low likelihood of, profound success as a trans person. And that's why, when I talk about meeting somebody where their goals are, even as you're talking about like buying a house, retirement, like those are very like traditional ideas of like what financial goals look like. And those are fine goals. But, I've worked with folks that are in the community who, are just looking to figure out how to budget, or looking to figure out like, okay, you know what, I got myself through school and I'm working now. Like what can I do? And like, what does any of this even mean to me? For some trans people, it's really just like, I want to know that I have enough money that if my boss fires me, I'm not going to lose my house.
Absolutely.
And like, that's a fine goal. And like, that might still fit into the realm of housing. And, maybe some of that money eventually does end up being a down payment for a house, but the immediate need is, security, and not necessarily, driven by a long-term strategy for wealth, but more just, how do I protect myself because the world's not going to protect me?
So walking through the process. So if somebody comes into your office and they're talking about their goals, and they have, say, a chunk of money, or they have like I say their portfolio in, hi, Laura, this is my monthly outgoings, this is my monthly incoming. Can you would look at that, would you? And then say, okay, here's where I could see you could potentially do some savings where maybe, and we could cut back here. And then you talk about risk. And then you could potentially say, would you like to invest like a little bit here for low risk, a little bit that's a little bit higher? But is that kind of, then you'll come up with a plan that way and then run it for them? Or just
so I don't sell any financial products. So you wouldn't open an account with me, for example. But I do help people, build out their own portfolios. There's a lot of ways to invest on your own now that are just as good and cheaper than, what most advisors will do for the majority of people these days. So helping, really on the investment side of it, a lot of the value is more in having somebody help you understand like risk and asset allocation, and then helping you through like the hard times, when markets go down and it gets scary. So those are all the parts that I can still help people with. I've done the other parts of it in the past, just for regulatory reasons. I'm not able to do that anymore. But yeah, I mean, as far as kind of going back into the overall, like what a financial plan looks like, is kind of a holistic view of everything. I think where I also differ is I work on smaller plans as well. So for some folks, we just chat for an hour. So I call it advice time. And, we meet first. We talk through what they're looking for. And if they're just kind of looking for some general advice and to just talk through like what's going on, then, people just kind of bring a list of questions and we rattle through them. And that's often helpful, especially for younger people. If we're talking about like, something like budgeting, that can get into, we do like a targeted plan. So that's, cheaper. It's a shorter engagement. But again, we're not going to plan for your retirement at 32 when you're worried about paying off your credit card debt. So, figuring out kind of what's the immediate problem is sometimes where people are at. So I try and give that range of services. Again, that's part of that accessibility and that inclusivity.
And you can work with anybody anywhere, really, right? Because you're virtual.
Except Quebec. But I'm actually, you know what? I saw an announcement today that might be coming soon. We'll see. But no, Quebec has a different regulatory regime for financial planning. So I'm working on it, but not yet.
So focusing for a moment on the sort of meta business rather than what you do, your experience as an entrepreneur, asking like, did being trans change your experience of being an entrepreneur is silly, is water wet. But was there anything that sort of stuck out to you, or was a moment that crystallized the difference pre and post transition, say, as an entrepreneur?
So actually, I've never been an entrepreneur pre-transition. We bought our first business basically around the same time I came out.
Okay. Yeah.
So actually, one of the first conversations my wife had to have with her staff was that she had a wife. So that was, that's just how we did it. We just went hard at it. We did it the best / worst possible way, I guess. So no, I've actually never really been an entrepreneur. and presenting cis before, so I don't actually have that experience.
Were there any roadblocks that you felt were attributable to that? And is that something that's on your mind, or is it like I find when I engage with that thought process, I tend to get tangled up, so I try and just kind of push it away. But were there any
There's
roadblocks for
100%. Like,
you?
yeah, you can tell. I mean, I was in business and in finance before coming out, so I do know what those rooms feel like. And I mean, to kind of illustrate it, I was asked to sit on the board of a chamber of commerce before coming out, and through their kind of onboarding process is when I came out, and that offer was never discussed again, we'll say. So no, the larger business community working as existing as an entrepreneur is definitely a much more of a closed door experience. Even I would say like in queer spaces as well, like there's still a gap there that I think exists for trans entrepreneurs too.
How important is it then for you to like move, like to navigate in like some of the entrepreneurial like networking opportunities and that? Because I know like it's funny, I can drag Emma out to lots of different things, and begrudgingly sometimes. But I find like the visibility. It's so important to be able to you have to do it, even though I mean we got comfortable not doing it in COVID. How important is it to you, or is that a goal like that you like to be doing a little bit more of that? Or
it's a hard thing because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. I would actually say kind of my main business these days is actually working with entrepreneurs. So talking about the planning part of it, I've really expanded that into kind of a full business consulting suite. So I do work with a lot of entrepreneurs, but it's often in kind of different ways that I run into them and meet with them. A lot of folks find me through my website, which is probably the most reliable way that I interact with people that then actually leads to business, is people that have kind of had a chance to warm up to the idea of me first, I think. When I meet people in person, definitely like other trans entrepreneurs, I think we get to have kind of an open conversation. But once I get out of that space, it starts getting a little bit dicier as to whether or not people necessarily see value in what I do, because I do things so differently. I think often they bring in their conception of what financial planning and what financial management coaching and consulting can look like, and they think about it in kind of a very like rigid, almost like accounting, very traditional way. And I really kind of what I've talked about like the personal financial planning, I'm able to bring even more of that creativity into entrepreneurial spaces. And there are some people that kind of instantly get it, and then there's some people that just like instantly don't. And yeah, I it's hard to say like is there value. You never know, and that's kind of the thing about networking. But I will say like I definitely probably hit my head against it a lot more than your average entrepreneur does. And yeah.
What do you mean hit your head?
Just like the time spent out and connecting doesn't necessarily translate into a ton of like meaningful contacts that will, like, sometimes it does. And it's like surprising and it's amazing. But then, if I go to, sometimes it's just like I get stuck in the corner of a room and I talk to a few people and then awkwardly like shuffle out. So like it's always kind of a crapshoot. And and it's like, and those those events are the ones that are like the most stressful and difficult to be within. So it's it's usually like when the panic attack finally is like overwhelmed me, it's time to drive home, is kind of the like that's my metric.
I did notice that all of the East Coast trans people found each other within about 20 minutes of Defy's doors opening. Which we had the delegation going. I have photos. It was awesome. But it was interesting how we all kind of like found each other very quickly.
I think it's important to do, isn't it? Like to try and bring together if you're traveling, right? Like to, especially like to bring together people or even give the opportunity to connect beforehand to know that you're going. What do you think?
I certainly think so. I find that finding other people in my position is both rare and very cool.
No, I 100% agree. I think it's the same conference the year before was in Kingston, and it was kind of the same thing. There was like the trans delegation at the back corner of the room. We just kind of like hung out with each other for the 3 days. So I think it's quite common, and part of it is that, like, you know, some people might drift in and out, but for the most part, it's hard to integrate into those spaces, even if they are kind of like queer centric spaces.
So we connected when I saw you were sitting. Well, I know Emma had already connected with you in Montreal in Defy in July, but that conference, you spoke on a conference panel or an event panel this summer during Pride, hosted with the Chamber of Commerce and the CGLCC. And I think what really stood out to me the most is that with the panel being, you know, two trans people, and then one person who is a great member of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, and like just the huge gaps in the idea of inclusion and how far we've come around, you know, the feeling of, yeah, we're all doing so great, and that lack of like people really getting it as far as for the trans community and understanding, you know, how really that's not a reality for everybody. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I got from listening to the panel that was, you know, really valuable. And I think a lot of people, well, people at the table, I think we're feeling it, that were sitting with me as well. What it, you know, being, you know, up there and kind of answering those questions, I think you're really great at addressing it as well and kind of focusing on that in that room. How did that make you feel? Like how
to make me feel? It was very stressful. Yeah, I definitely like I kind of curled up into a ball the next day and just like had to recover. It's hard to like output that much energy with confidence when you know it's like rubbing against the grain for people. Yeah, and I mean to set the stage a little bit more, she was a self-identified lipstick lesbian, so we're talking about a very, you know, comfortable cis presenting gay woman. And yeah, there definitely was a huge canyon in experience of what's being discussed. And one of the conversations I feel like doesn't come up a lot within, you know, queer and trans spaces is the role of disclosure that trans people don't have. You know, CGLCC puts out a stat a lot of like, you know, a third of their business owners that they surveyed don't feel comfortable coming out. And that's really something that I don't feel a lot of trans people even really get to think about. You, as a trans person, you don't get to decide if someone perceives you as cis or trans. And, you know, and also to talk about, you know, being perceived as cis is also not necessarily a benefit. Like it's very destructive to, you know, who you are as well, to just be like labeled as cis. So you really don't get to like control how you're perceived in the same way. And I think that's what we were talking a lot about, is that like, you know, where progress has been mostly for queer people. I mean, if you look at, there's a great book by Susan Stryker, Transgender History, and the challenges that, you know, trans people were having in the 60s and 70s haven't gone away, but they have gone away for queer people. And the challenges that queer people were having in the 80s and 90s have gotten lessened, but not for trans people. So like, it's always just this like constant history of trans people kind of wearing the consequences of progress, but never really benefiting from it. And, you know, I think on that panel, you know, the two of us had the opportunity to really just kind of say, you know what, like, what is this progress?
I think it was a great opportunity for that though. And I was going to say, I do think that you're very confident and not dogmatic. I think it was an important conversation that I feel like the panel, I feel like it was, and I'm that's just observing that the best interests were there, and it was a learning for for a lot of people maybe in the room, but I felt like it was it elevated that event to me. I think it wasn't just your typical pre-screened, pre-approved Q&A. It was real.
One of my least favorite sayings is things are so much better now. And I've been to multiple conferences now where it almost seems like it's a theme. And talking about, sitting in that, back table with all the trans people and, that theme of, actually, I think literally the words, things are so much better now at that conference were said like almost every 20 minutes. And, around that table were people that, they were entrepreneurs because their careers had ended because they transitioned. They were, professionals that were massively underemployed and maltreated because they were trans. And, we're looking around and we're like, where is this better? Like, who is this better for? When did this progress happen? And what are you talking about?
It's a we versus us, right? Or we and them. Yeah.
And I very much think, within the community, if we want to talk about it as a larger community, I think we need to be able to have the conversation that like there isn't equal opportunity for every letter of that alphabet.
So in today's TD Connected Community Moment, we'd love to know, do you participate in active financial planning and have any advice that you can share with us here? We would love to learn if you have any tips or tricks that you can share. If there's anything that stood out to you from this particular show, click the link that is in the show notes and we put it up here on the screen. And we really look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for tuning in. No, and I mean, it's interesting because for me as a cis person, but a parent, I mean, that's obvious. And I just can't understand how it wouldn't be obvious to everybody within the community because, to me, that's the sort of the biggest piece of it is that where we're at for trans inclusion. And that's kind of like where they were around gay and lesbian rights back in the 70s. Like we're still like 50 years behind or more.
We haven't caught up to the 70s, actually. Trans is still considered a mental disorder, which was, queer people got that in the 70s. So no, we haven't caught up with that.
I think Emma and I, we were at the Twist LGBTQIA plus awards last year at the Black and White Gala. And it was just interesting because for the amount of corporates that sponsored or got up and announced awards, Emma was going to start to like put up a sign or a ding for everyone that got up there that couldn't say the acronym. Like they just SLGBT, but they had it maybe inserted in their speech like 20 times, but they couldn't. And that was multiple people. And we just kept going, do you not rehearse? Like, can you not even say it? Like, why are you here?
Do you remember the Staples used to have, I think it was Staples had a button and you would hit it and it would order something. The easy button, right. I wanted to, like next year, I'm going to bring a button and it's just going to say the acronym and they can put it on the podium and they can just hit it when they need to say it. And there were large quantities of sympathy there also because public speaking is a nightmare and a lot of those people, it's not their job. That said, maybe like if you're going to put it in your speech 10 times, you should practice. And I think there is like, I don't know, I run into it a lot. I think there is this idea that inclusion comes without practice. And then if you can't do it without practice, you're doing it wrong and you should be able to. And I think that we probably should move past that because nothing comes without practice. No fluency has ever come without practice. But
I think that's also the major
stumbling block. Take that on as a responsibility. Like you must practice if you want to be good at this, and also have some sympathy for it. This person is still practicing.
Your empathy, yeah, because shame will shut it down, right? Like shame is going to just shut down that feeling of
shame is not particularly useful to me. No, I haven't found a use for it yet. I can't pay rent.
No, or somebody that's learning, like someone that's learning that you're going to shame them. They're just instantly going to go back in and go, okay, I can't get this right. I'm going to avoid the conversations. I'm going to keep my head down and I'm going to just try not to make a mistake, but I'm going to disengage.
And avoiding the conversation is why, well, certainly in my experience, why I haven't been hired for jobs because someone's afraid they're going to make a mistake. So they just decide like, I'm just going to I'm just going to not involve myself, which is really like the definition of privilege. If you have the ability to say, I'm just not going to deal with this today, whatever that thing is, you have privilege in that area.
And that's what I'm going to say. The conversation around inclusion often like completely goes off the rails as soon as somebody's right to privilege feels threatened. And I do, I've somewhat challenged the idea of when people talk about like, you'll hear sometimes like rights aren't pie, there's enough for everyone. But I think we also need to talk about the fact that there are people in our society who feel they have a right to their privilege, and they have a right to comfort, and they have a right to belonging that they don't extend to everyone else, and that not all of us have. And, there is a cost to dealing with that. And the cost is often borne by the person who is not belonging and who does not, experience that privilege in that moment. And, folks that are sitting there saying, oh, well, I want to make a difference and I want, the world to be more inclusive, also need to accept that might mean they might lose their, right to comfort at times, and that they might actually have to be the ones who have to experience the discomfort that, marginalized people just experience by existing.
I love that. It's like, comfort, it's a risk, but that's all you're going to lose is your feeling of comfort, but you're going to gain. I know, I just from my own, I grew up in a small town. I grew up in Brampton, Ontario. It was a tiny town. Privilege of being middle class, family owned a business, whatever. And, I grew up thinking, okay, well, we have these rights. You have to work hard for these pieces. As if you're working hard and you're like playing by the rules, which I guess, I could, right? But it was kind of that light bulb for me, like when my kiddo came home and said, hey, like, this is my reality. This is who I am. I'm transgender. And like that learning was like, what do you mean? And then, okay, trying to figure it out, but then all of a sudden seeing the rights disappear. And for me, it was like, wait a minute, these rights should apply to you. They apply to everybody. We pay taxes. We're here, like we're citizens of and I'm ashamed to say, but that was a huge wake up moment to me because I hadn't faced that before. I hadn't seen that before. I'm for whatever, I can't say why, but I can say like ever since then, I'm like, I need to undo this. This is not right. And the idea that if I feel this, other people must feel this too. And so it's kind of like building that awareness, I guess. But it's embarrassing, I think, for people when you throw shame on it as well. And it kind of, but it does get to a certain point. I think actually Chris Cochran-Nor had said that at some point, like you can't say, you're in your 60s or your 70s and say, this is new to me. Because if it is new to you, like at this point, like too, it's like, there's enough of it going on. There's enough around that you can hear depending on where you're living. If you're in an urban center, certainly the information's there. It's around you. Look, open your eyes and see it and figure it out. But
I would, Stonewall happened 55 years ago.
And we all have a supercomputer in our pocket.
So even the idea that there is this like, it's not knowing about it is also a choice at this point. Like you've lived through, we as a society have lived through, the civil rights movement and had to confront, the existence of racism for 60 years now. And not to say that racism didn't exist beforehand, but that like visible and taught discussions of racism have existed for 60 years, and yet we can't seem to talk about it. Homophobia and transphobia have been, part of the national record for 60 years now. And, even longer if you want to include, European history. These instances of hate and discrimination have existed the entire time. It's the choice of people to ignore them.
And that's bringing us back.
They can't make the excuse that they don't know it. They choose to ignore it.
Bringing us back to the privilege discussion, I think that the right to ignore it, especially when it comes to my child is not ready for that. This person should be able to ignore that person for as long as possible, is ridiculous.
No.
You don't get to ignore things. They exist.
Right. If you're experiencing transphobia at the age of 5 or 6, the other 5 and 6-year-olds are able to like be exposed to what is this about and what should you be doing that's better. And like, so we often talk like in the workshops, Emma talks about like the pink triangle and the idea of it not having been taught at all in every section wherever we're talking about World War II, which is something that has been taught in schools for years. And that's never been one small minor piece that's been brought into the idea of.
Yeah, I just have a splash page of some queer history, and I brought it up, and the number of times I have pointed at a pink triangle and asked, does everyone know what this is? I honestly, the first time, I swear it was entirely rhetorical. I assumed that every person knew basically what this was about, and it turns out, no, not at all. And I don't know when I learned that, certainly 30 years before my transition, so I don't understand. But that was something that I picked up along the way quite by accident, and to understand that is a unique position was really surprising to me.
Well, and I often find it interesting, like the black triangle has also seemed to have faded from the community's memory, and also that the pink triangle was also for trans people. I've had queer people say like, oh, the pink triangle was for gay men, and it was not. It's exclusively it was not exclusively their badge to be branded with. So no, there's a huge amount of history in there that has definitely gone unremembered and
There's a lot to be learned. I didn't know that, actually. Thanks for saying that, because I don't know if I had thought about it either way of who specifically it was for, but I didn't know that. But it included the trans people, because I think I thought probably back then, like you in that space, and for say armed forces going overseas, and for people there in being locked up, how many out people would there be? And is it more like, again, like with the fruit machine, where people are assuming that you are and pointing a finger and saying, oh, you're trans because you walk this way or you talk this way? How many people are actually living out and freely then anyway because of the laws and the rights?
They did have the the Hirschfield Institute at that point, so there were I mean, there was not only
there was legal recognition.
They had passports with like they were printing identification with updated gender information on it for trans people at the time. It was experimental and it was only in Germany, so there's that. But there definitely was an existence even that far back.
No, and that's the Night of Long Knives was actually very reliant on the Hirschfeld Institute's documents.
What's that?
The Night of Long Knives. It was the Nazi purge for queer and trans people in positions of power in government and business, and they basically rounded up as many queer and trans people as they could find, and it was the documents from the Hirschfeld Institute that led them to a lot of the trans people. And it was very early, I think 1932.
Okay, interesting. I'll find a link. We'll do some research and we'll put it in the show notes.
Laura, it has been wonderful having you in the studio today. It has been eye-opening and a great chat. I do hope we see you here again soon. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Great.
I didn't expect to get so lost in the history, but I guess those are part of our stories, right? That's the whole. Absolutely. That's the whole name of the thing. It's coming full circle.
We got the title in there.
Right? No, thank you both for having me, and hopefully I haven't worn out my welcome too much. Sometimes people get tired of me. So
no, I'm already thinking, okay, when can we have you on again? So this is good. I lost track of time, so it's great. Thanks, Laura.
Well, thank you very much for coming in.
Bye.